Hello, everyone. Just making sure we've got everybody coming from the waiting room and give everyone a chance to come in here. Awesome. Looks like we've got some people joining now. So we'll go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here on our USCF Horse Welfare Guidelines webinar. My name is Natalie Voss. I'm the Director of Corporate Communications for USCF, and I'm here with David O'Connor, who's the Chief of Sport for USCF. David's going to give a presentation to you all about our recently released horse welfare guidelines based on a stoplight system that he'll explain. And after he presents the guidelines, then we'll have a question and answer period. So you should have a Q&A option at the bottom of your toolbar there, and feel free to send us questions as we roll through this, and we'll leave time at the end to answer them. So over to you, David.
Thanks, Natalie. Hi, everybody. So this started as we've gone down this road of horse welfare in this last, putting it in the forefront of these last 3 or 4 years has been a big move. And we really are trying to make sure we talk about it into a broader section. And so we actually put this in front of the licensed officials, this presentation. And we've also had a lot of people just work on this in this last year. So and it's a thought process of creating some guidelines so everybody's kind of thinking along the same lines, whether it's an official, whether it's a trainer, whether it's an athlete, what is actually being looked at, and how do we all agree with the judgment section of what those boundaries of the sport are. And the German Federation had come up with something several years ago talking about Rollkur, which was quite interesting and quite good. And so we kind of probably just in a lot of different ways, we Americanized it and came up with this idea of the stoplight, of something that everybody knows, everybody has a visual of about our process. And so we're really looking at, trying to promote a thought process where we celebrate what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to celebrate what each sport, no matter what sport it is, has the ability to show. And we're trying to make sure that the boundaries are, understood about how that sport is played. And it doesn't matter what you do. And so that's really kind of what this is about. So if we can go on, Natalie, if we can, or on to the next slides. And so this is really just talking about a conversation. And again, it's about creating guidelines about this. These are not absolutes. There's always going to be a judgment call in most of these type of subjects, but they are guidelines that we can all talk about, we can talk about, and we continue to improve as we go forward. Okay, so we go on with the next one. So I think I think what we're all really trying to do is make sure that we can get to the place where we're celebrating what we put out in front of the public and what we do this on an everyday basis. And I don't think anybody would disagree that that's what we're trying to do. But we also know that there are times where, some emotions come into it, or, not achieving goals, and that can have a negative effect on the presentation. And so we're really trying to put these guidelines forward of what the boundaries are. These guidelines are really all rested on the shoulders of the rules. There's no question. The rule book is the rule book. As we go forward about what the boundaries in each one of the sports are. But these are guidelines about really from an official's point of view, from an athlete's point of view, about what we're looking for, and can we agree of what is presented in a positive way and what starts to make you uncomfortable and what actually needs to be stopped. Okay, so we go on again. So we want to make sure that we understand that distinction, and there's really 3 sides of this. We can go on with the next one if we can. Is this idea of a stoplight of this green and yellow and red. So green would be the horse friendly that everybody wants to watch. It's the thing that everybody enjoys. The horse is happy doing its job. It might be fully athletic in an athletic point of view, but it looks very, very content about what it's doing. The yellow is a place where it starts to make you feel a little bit uncomfortable. I know for me, when watching something like that's where I kind of start to squirm a little bit. But if hopefully it's something that's very, very short term, and resolves itself, and you're like, okay, well, that's a very typical thing that can happen in that relationship. And then there's the side of red where really want to make you feel like it's crossing a line and it's outside the boundaries, and you say that's really not okay. And really, that process has to be dealt with and dealt with by an official coming up and having that conversation with you. Now, sometimes that can be quite emotional because you might not see it, but it's very, very important that those actions are that make people feel that uncomfortable, or something that basically we do want to make sure that that stops. You break the cycle. Well, we talk about just even take a break. You break the cycle. A lot of the times you can think about it for just a couple of minutes and then come back and start again, and maybe in a new way of thinking. And that's really kind of what the intention is. Okay, I think we can go on. So that is our idea of the green, the yellow, and the red. Now, what we've tried to do in off this document that we've seen and we've been working on kind of probably almost for 9 months, and we've socialized it out to officials and riders, and this is where we've come up with, after really kind of almost 9 months of work on this, is this idea of what is horse friendly, right? So it's harmonious. I think everybody can agree with what we like to watch. The riding, the way of riding and training is, it's correct. It's has a softness to it. Correct application of the aids, within all of the different sports. And then yellow starts to be in the place where you start to see, kind of force. You start to see an aggressive side of the aids. And this isn't just with a horse that is misbehaving or something like that. It is much more where you start to feel uncomfortable because there seems to be strength and emotion into it. So, and it starts to get into restriction, restriction to the head and neck, or certainly, if a whip is being misused, doesn't mean that it can't be used, but it's misused, or spurs the same way. That's the yellow side. And then really the red side is this aggressive, and especially continued aggressive behavior with emotion or anger. That emotional outbreak of what I think we've all seen it before. And we really need to go in there and stop that cycle. Have an official who is watching be able to stop that cycle. I'm going to say right now, that's always going to be a judgment call, right? That is going to be the judgment call from the official at that point. That's a line that it feels like it's crossed, and they're going to come up and they're going to say something to you. And I think if you're in a place, and we all are in a place, that we can realize that if somebody's actually going to come up to here, that I'm probably playing a game that we don't want to be able to celebrate, then it's going to be fairly serious. And so we're looking for we don't want the aggressive behavior. You don't want the over restriction to the head and neck, in hyperflexion. Or if a horse is, not that it bucks, but does it repeatedly, like run away, buck, or something like that. You're like, whoa, this thing's got to stop here. And that's really kind of what we're going after with this side of the way of riding or training. I think we can go on if we could. And then the other subject would be the horse's movements or appearance, right? Is it content? That produces a regularity, that produces a swinging way of going, no matter what the action is, and an understanding positive, really atmosphere around it, right? And its attitude. That is, you get the feeling that the horse is in the game and that likes the game. When it starts to feel uncomfortable, where there's stress and anxiety coming through, or either from a dullness, right, or kind of excessive foaming sweat, which is usually caused by tension, not sweating, because if it's hot, horses are going to sweat. But that foaming sweat, where you get the feeling that the horses are starting to get to that place where they look uncomfortable, and that's anywhere from what goes on in their face with a pinning of ears, or their tails with that excessive swishing. Into a place where they're showing tension. That is something that starts to make you question. Maybe there's a conversation of like, yeah, I think you're on a line here. the take a break idea, right? Which is, doesn't have a punitive measure to it. There's not going from the hearing committee. You're not doing anything like that. But having a take a break attitude is really important. Or it gets up to red, right? The lame, the disobediences through bucking or rearing or bolting or whatever, that becomes a long-term process. And you see it in horses' attitudes where they're, the head shaking, due to the not being able to accept the aids. And that is, those are the kind of the big things that we're looking for all the time. Besides the obvious, if the horse is exhausted, which very rarely happens, but if you start to see that. So, and that's where it's got to be stopped. That's where an official's got to come up and say, wait a minute, we need to stop this. This isn't a direction that we can accept anywhere in some type of public or even really private atmosphere. Okay, we go on. So then we talk about head and neck position when we talk about hyperflexion or roker. Generally the horses, no matter what breed or what game that you play, but you see the horse's expression being soft or expressive, but the horse's face is out in front of the vertical, basically, or at the vertical. And for the natural carriage of that breed are different. So if you're talking about the difference between where a hunter goes or where a saddlebred goes, it doesn't really make any difference for the natural carriage of what that horse is looking for. And so you want to make sure that the horse has really kind of accepted the aids and is not fighting it. The cautionary side is that really, really short neck. Now, if a horse goes down behind the vertical for a very short time and it's a small amount, that's not the restriction that we're talking about and not an issue. The restriction that we're talking about is the one where the horse is really restricted in its head and neck that has an effect on its gait. It's usually because of a strong aid nature from the rider and the feeling that the horse has nowhere to go. That is really what we get to the place where when that comes extreme, that action needs to be stopped. We know scientifically with the research that it has a negative effect on the horse's physique and their mental state. But where it crosses that line into aggression and aggressive use of aids and the restriction that the horse has nowhere to go, that is something that is really worldwide in any breeder discipline is just not condoned anymore, and it needs to be stopped. And that is really what we're looking for. You'll see it that aggressive flexing to the side or restriction that the horse doesn't have anywhere to go. That is where that's a action that really all the sports have talked about. That because of the negative aspect of the physicality and the mental side, right, is something that needs not to be seen. Okay, we go on to the next. There we go. And the same thing with the acceptance of the aids, which is, showing, horses lightly chewing and lightly foaming, that's fine. But you get the feeling that there's an acceptance of aids because the mouth is generally closed or extensively small chewing. But when you start to hear the grinding, you start to see the mouth come open against the bits, or tongue above the bit, consistently. That is something that is starting to be cautionary measure. If it's short term, it's not that big of a deal, right? But if it goes on, and that needs to be stopped because you get the feeling like the tongue is overly pressured, and that's that blue tongue that people would talk about. Any type of blood or lesions or blood around the mouth really needs to be looked at. That the official is going to come in and be able to take a look at whether the horse bit its lip for a short time and then it goes away, or if there's any other type of blood. That's a big deal, right? And that needs to be stopped. It's not just for the benefit of the horse, but also something that it shouldn't be presented out into any type of competition environment. So that's that red side where you get the feeling that there's such restriction in their mouth, and they go after it, and you start to see that tension to a high degree. That is an action that we would want to end. Okay, we go on again. And the same thing a little bit with use of equipment. Now, there's a list of equipment that is allowed in every different sport. Every discipline has something that's a little bit different, but it's really how you use it. So whether you're using something that causes, again, that restriction, does that freedom allow the horse's movement to be shown? That is, whether it's the bit or the bridle, or the saddle, the boots, does that have a way that is showing how the horse can be, expressed and shown off of what we're trying to do? Or does it cause restriction, right, through nose bands or double bridles that are used in too strong of a way where the curb really kind of goes beyond that 45 degrees? That kind of incorrect use is something that, one, can be cautionary. If it's only a short time, okay, it resolves itself. But again, if that equipment gets into being a really restrictive, or the horse is so against it that it is causing discomfort into that place, that is, again, where we need to stop that action and have an official, okay, come in and be able to stop that process. Okay. So, if any of these things, if you're concerned, if it gets up to a red side, whatever, and you're not the official, you can go to the official that's on the ground. There's going to be somebody there that you could have that conversation with, and the judgment call happens of something that happened. If you really feel strong about it, there's no question there is an action that you can go straight to the USEF at the end of the competition. And there's a form, with the horse abuse and unethical treatment report form, usef.org on the website. Or if it needs to be, you feel like you need to support this, report this, can be done anonymously through that number of 28733 or to USEF by text or WhatsApp, and it'll go straight to that the reporting thing and will be answered. You will get an answer back from that. Okay, we go on. So this is a bigger part of it, is the competition's contact with the athlete. So we have different levels of a recorded warning or just a talk. The first thing has got to be a talk, and the first thing that we're trying to encourage is the take a break attitude. It's like, we don't think that's going in a direction. Take a break, think about it, hack around the ring there for a minute, and then start up and see where you are. See if you can take the emotion, breaking the cycle of taking the emotion out of it. So the first part should be advisory. Now, if that escalates into a place where, again, emotion starts to come into it, either towards the horse coming back into that, or come back to the official, that's where it can go up into a little bit of another level. It could be a recorded warning, so that there's an official warning that actually happens to you. Doesn't do a disciplinary process of that. Could be a yellow card, which is more aggressive. Or it could actually go farther, with the right to go all the way up through the regulatory process of the USEF. Really, of these stages, hopefully, the advisory nature right from the beginning is the thing that breaks the cycle, which is what we would all want. And there are levels above that in case it starts to escalate in a way. But nobody really wants that to happen, and that is really why we've done this system of having that you don't just go up straight into the regulatory process. There's a warning, there's a thought process, a recorded warning, or possibly a yellow card before any type of disciplinary action really has to take in. But the disciplinary action can happen, okay, if it feels like it escalates to the place. Okay. So what we're looking for is the thing that we all want to present, right? We want to present our horses to each other and to the public, of understanding and celebrate this relationship that we have with the horses, no matter what the game that gets played. And that is the thing that we all want to celebrate. And we want to make sure that we do have boundaries around how those games are played, just like any other sport. Whether you talk about soccer, or you talk about baseball, you talk about basketball, the referees there to have boundaries about how the sport is played. We have the same thing with the officials about how the boundaries are supposed to be played. Okay, and we know that with officials, there are judgments in those lines somewhere. But the more that we can talk about where these guidelines are, where these sections are, what we're looking for, And what we're not looking for is something that I think is really important to everybody. So it's real important that, one, we keep talking about it. We keep talking about this education process with the officials, with trainers, with owners, with riders, to make sure that we're all onto the same pages about what we're trying to celebrate with our horses out in the competition environment that we're in. Okay. So that's the thought process that we've gone down. This idea of a stoplight, again, it's a visual thing for people to understand. This is the direction that we feel like we can have agreement on about what we're all trying to present, again, in that competition environment. So I don't know, Natalie, are there any questions that are coming up or thought processes that are coming up on this thing? Yeah.
We have a couple. If
Okay.
you have a question, then use the Q&A button at the bottom of your toolbar on Zoom to get that question over to us. We did have one come in that somebody had actually asked before the webinar started. What steps can licensed officials take to ensure that competitors understand and follow the guidelines? And you sort of talked about how they should approach someone if they see them not following the guidelines, but what sort of steps can they take to make sure competitors understand what those are if the competitor doesn't happen to be on one of the two webinars today and tomorrow?
Sure, and this is going to be on the website, for an overall look for everybody to be able to see the same thing. This is what we're all looking for. Certainly, it's going to be part of the education process and becoming an education process for the licensed officials themselves. And so we really feel like in this step it's much about education, which means talking about it, means these webinars, means on social license, it means having it on the website, it means these videos that we've just come out with over these last couple of weeks of trying to put it into even more of a visual sense. These are all the products that we're trying to get out there to make sure that the message stays consistent and is understood by all of the different stakeholders that are out here.
Awesome. And if you haven't seen the videos we've been releasing over the last few weeks, if you go to our homepage and click or mouse over the horse welfare tab, the Protecting Horses page has links to all of the videos David's talking about, where he does sort of a deep dive on each of these subject areas within the guidelines. So that's where you can catch up on those.
And very consistent along these lines that we've just talked about too.
Yes, absolutely. If we have a lot of professionals on this webinar today, they might be asking themselves, if I see red zone contact at a horse show, should I be intervening myself? What are your thoughts on that?
I think that I really have two different places with this, because if this is a person that you know and you have a relationship, I think you can go up and say, hey, I think you ought to take a break. We've actually heard from Dr. Hurd from the AQHA, and fun enough that they have had a lot of success with that within the AQHA side of the equation, is actually top trainers going to top trainers and say, hey, I think that's a line you should think about it. But certainly if it's something that comes up into something that you feel is egregious, or getting to that place where it becomes, then the official that is in that area, right? So you talk about your stewards or your TDs, right? That is the place to go if you feel like it has crossed the line and it's not settling itself.
And if the licensed official approaches somebody and suggests that they take a break, and that person is in too emotional a place to take that on board and reacts really negatively to them, maybe yells at them, what happens in that situation? You might have people kind of wondering what this poor licensed official is going to do if that conversation doesn't go the right way.
And that's where these other tools that have been created with this recorded warning, where it becomes more official, or a yellow card, and those do have ramifications if they're repeated. The one-off is not the thing, and hopefully it hits home, like, okay, maybe I was out of bounds there. But if it's repeated over several times within a year, there's actually, it does trigger more of a regulatory process after that. And so it's really, really important that everybody, if people realize and can accept that that's an emotional moment that is crossing a line, maybe the acceptance of somebody coming and telling you to take a break and think about it, without being aggressive, is the first line of how we all want to deal with it. And so having the official have that kind of graduated side of the conversation is really, really important. Now, it could go all the way down to the end that if it gets into a really bad situation and everybody's, get really angry, start and yell at each other, or go back and have the same type of process with the horse, it actually could step all the way up into the regulatory process, right? Which is actually something that we all want to avoid. We'd love to be able to solve it through the graduated processes underneath.
And I know that you gave people the tools at the end there if they want to report something directly to USEF, either in addition to talking to a licensed official on the ground or afterwards if they feel like they need to just make extra sure that something's gotten on our radar. Can you tell people a little bit about what process that report would go through once it gets to us, just sort of the basics of that?
Yeah, I'm going to stay with the basics of that since I'm not the expert of it. But the basics of it is that if something is reported, it will be investigated, and it will come back to you to say that it is going to be investigated. And there are now quite a few investigators, some very professionally at the very top level, very extremely educated, that can investigate these type of things. And then that process, and that takes a while. Just, I know everybody wants everything to happen by tomorrow, but, that does take a little while to go. Are there witnesses, or is there video? Is the video accurate? Will witnesses actually be able to say something that is, that you could use? I think all of those things are really important. Then there's a decision at that point whether they feel like the process is something that could go through the regulatory process, or they feel like it's theirs, and that's after conversations with quite a few people. If it goes through the regulatory process, that's even longer because the investigation comes again, okay, and becomes way more specific. And if it goes through that process, then it gets in front of the hearing committee. So there's really these 3 steps before it actually gets to the hearing committee. That is internal, then deciding whether it is they have jurisdiction. Do we have jurisdiction? Do we have that process, which takes a little while, and then the full investigation process if it's decided that there is an issue here. And again, that takes a lot because you then have the place where whoever is, has these type of things given to them, they obviously have a right to be heard in our judicial system. So that takes a while, right? Because you are going to hear both sides of the story, from witnesses or from the actual person. That investigation, I would say investigation between them, that right to be heard is sacrosanct in this process, okay? Before the decision ever gets to whether it goes into a hearing process. So it's really 3 different, sections in it, and it does. I know everybody wants things to happen. As I said, they want it to happen yesterday, not even tomorrow. But it does take a while. And the commitment is that we'll at least inform you of where the process is. Okay, so that to make sure that if you did something, which is a little bit of a newer deal, but as you will get noticed that it is in an investigation stage, okay, or it's in a regulatory stage, right? And you'll get notice back. So there's a closing of the loop. You won't be given any of the details because that's part of the investigation of, witnesses and et cetera, et cetera. But in the end, you will get a thing that it is in the process and it is going through the process.
You
That's something we heard about quite strongly, and have committed to. So that is, so even though it might not have happened like that 5 years ago or 10 years ago or 15 years ago, that is a process that we are doing now.
Awesome. You mentioned jurisdiction. We have a question from the audience. What can be done if we see something off of showgrounds, perhaps at a private facility or schooling competition?
You can go through the same process of sending it to the USEF in the Horse Welfare Protection. I'm sorry, I don't have that. I've forgotten the email right there for a minute, but you can bring it in. Now, then it gets investigated and feel like, does the USEF have jurisdiction? That's number one. because not all the cases they do, if you see something. But if they have jurisdiction, and that net is pretty broad for USEF members, then that investigation process happens. And then you do that same individual investigation, deciding whether we have jurisdiction or whether something can happen. There's a next level of investigation. Now the interviews of going back and forth and having somebody that is accused being able to defend themselves before it gets to a hearing process. So it follows the same process. And again, unfortunately, if you put that on Tuesday morning, that's all not going to happen by Wednesday morning. It's a process that does take a while to make sure it's thorough and fair, and it's fair to all parties.
That makes sense. We have another question from an audience member. There are a number of welfare education programs and apps available today to help people better understand the emotional states of horses. Is USEF incorporating any of those resources into their educational programs?
Yeah, there's a lot of science that is coming out. I would think horse welfare from a scientific point of view is a growing field. And certainly I know I do a lot of reading and research of what is out there. So I do think it is, it adds to the conversation. If somebody says that it's an absolute, there is no absolute in this, right? And that is where realistically there are judgment calls out there. And that's a judgment call from not just from a horse welfare point of view, but we all live in, there's many sports that are judgment calls in the performance. When we think about dressage or we think about saddlebreds or whatever, and that's a judge's opinion of that is good or that's not good. So we have these judgment calls that are inherent within our sport. And this is actually not going to be able to get away from that judgment call also.
Great. It's a really good point. Sort of on that topic, that I've got one here. I have a horse in my barn who habitually does something that we call helicopter tail, where the tail just kind of in moments of enthusiasm just sort of spins and spins and spins. Can you talk a little bit about the context that people should be using when they're trying to apply these welfare guidelines? Like if you just have that one element of a red, yellow, green scenario, how should somebody look at a situation and decide, is this really a problem or is this just a quirk?
Yes, I've had one of those horses myself. So, and quite expressive. Or I've even known, even big time horses in my sport that have had that with them, going cross country or show jumping or whatever. And so I think you do put it into the total package, right? So if the horse is, ears are pinned back and he's grinding his teeth and he's doing all that kind of stuff and his tail is going, that's a whole different package of the same thing. The horse's ears are up and he's galloping along and he's looking like this and his tail is going, that's part of, that horse's probably expression. So it is going to be a judgment call of what the whole package is, because if it's tied to 3 or 4 other signs of tension or distress, then that needs to be talked about, right? If it is a one thing and it's not, and the horse doesn't look like any distress, that's a whole nother conversation. So that's why I said it's really a judgment call, because you really do have to put it into what the total package looks like.
And this might be kind of a similar answer, but I know that you mentioned in the yellow section for equipment use, the use of the whip and trying to decide when somebody might be in a yellow zone versus a green versus a red zone with that, if they're in a breeder discipline that doesn't have really specific rules that would address that.
Well, in our rules, we basically said the misuse of whip, and basically that is going to be tied into a punishment thing, right? Are you using the whip to back up your aid about going forward and the horse has a way forward? Okay, that's a totally different aspect than using a whip in a punishment way, or worse, right? If there's anger or emotionality to the use of the whip at the time, right? It's being used in frustration because the horse didn't, jump the jump or that type of thing. So in the end, that judgment call is going to be that, and that's where the misuse of the whip is very, very important. If it used to encourage a horse forward and he's got a way to go and all that kind of stuff, That's very, very different from somebody that is going to a place of hitting a horse quite strong, and in a place where he has nowhere to go. And if you think about it in other sports, right, where it's not even clear, where the use of the whip, in a way, let's say for driving, with a forehand, that your front horses are, 6 meters away from you. So that is the touch with a whip. You can't say that you can't use a whip, because the touch with a whip for straightness, not even going forward, but straightness, that's how those horses are taught. That's how, and it's not a punishment point of view. So when we talk about using it in anger, in punishment and using it in anger, that's where that line suddenly gets crossed.
I'm down to my last question, so if anybody has anything they want to ask, please do put it in the Q&A box here on Zoom. You mentioned blood with regard to equipment. We recently, the board recently passed a general rule on blood. Can you talk a little bit about how those things sort of dovetail with each other as a general guideline?
Yeah, and funny enough, there's a lot of different disciplines have different, even stronger blood rules than what is established here by the USEF. The basic one is going to be that if there's blood on the horse, that horse can be stopped and wipe the blood, and if it's fresh blood, it keeps coming back, it's a resurgence of blood, right? Then that horse has to go away. If he bit his lip and then it's healed within 2 seconds, and you go up and wipe and there's no blood that comes back, okay, well then that horse could be allowed to continue. But if that comes back, because it's basically an open cut, or something from your spurs where it is, an open deal, that is where suddenly that horse needs to be taken out of the game. There are disciplines that actually have stronger ones, right? The Arabians have a stronger rule. They say no blood, period. Absolutely. So everybody's different, but this is that rule, basically kind of talking about athlete induced, which means either from a bit or from your spurs or from your equipment, that causes blood that continues. Even if you go wipe it off, but it really continues, that is the one where that horse should be eliminated at that point, not allowed to compete.
We've got one more here. It seems like the welfare guidelines refer only to a ridden horse or a horse and a horse-human interaction, such as lunging. What about the way horses are kept, fed or watered, or held or withheld food or water? Those left in cross ties too long, et cetera, and other types of welfare issues like that.
Yes, I would say, the stewards have the ability to come through any place on the property, right? So which means stabling, it means the schooling rings, so all of that. And if it is found that horses are being withheld water, or something like that, yeah, then the steward can absolutely make the recommendation that that person has, comes into that process of a warning or a yellow warning card, or even the judicial process itself, the regulatory process itself. So the stewards have that right to go anywhere on the competition grounds for that. And so hopefully those things can be noticed if prevalent, and dealt with in their appropriate place at that point.
Great. That's the last question that I had. So I want to thank everybody for coming, and oh, wait, sorry, we got one more. Oh, somebody was wanting to know if the recording will be shared. Yes, the recording will be shared afterwards. I think it gets automatically sent to anybody who registered, and then also we're going to make sure that we have that available on our website as well. So we also have one tomorrow afternoon or evening at 6 o'clock that's aimed at riders, parents, athletes. But we know that people are likely to tune into whichever one works for their schedule. So also, if you know somebody who's interested in this and they can come to tomorrow night's webinar instead of today, then we're happy to have them. We emailed out the registration links to our competing members at the end of last week, and they're also on our Facebook feed, as well as our Facebook and Instagram stories right now. So those are available for you to do that. I
Yeah,
think
I think it's really important that what we're really trying to do is bring the conversation out to the forefront. That's the point. right? We're trying to put the conversation out in front of all of us. And not thinking that it's just, one thing or what somebody sitting in an office just making up. This is about putting a conversation out in front of the community and the conversation amongst ourselves, which is only going to benefit the horse in the end.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much to everybody for tuning in. We hope this was helpful and have a great afternoon.
Yep. We'll see you out in the circles.